The stage lights burned white-hot across the studio, turning the desk edges into sharp strips of chrome. The live sign glowed red. A wall of cameras stared like unblinking eyes. Robert De Niro leaned across the table, veins standing at his temple, and let it rip, "You're just a kid." The line cracked the air like a belt on concrete. Gasps scattered through the audience, a few eager claps fizzled when they realized the tone wasn't a joke, it was a swing. Karoline didn't flinch. 20-something, pressed navy blazer, silver cross at her collar catching the light, she kept her chin level and her breath measured, the way you do when you've trained to take heat without giving away your pulse. Her eyes didn't leave his. She didn't blink. The moderator reached for a commercial card and hesitated, sensing the kind of electricity that melts rehearsed segments. The control room whispered, "Hold, don't cut, stay wide." De Niro tried to ride the energy he'd just kicked loose. He gestured toward the audience like a director blocking a scene. "This isn't a movie," he snapped, eyes on Karoline, voice dipping low to project menace. "This is real. You don't know enough to be here." The actor cadence was there, the timing, the gravity, the expectation of applause. It didn't come. Karoline leaned forward a fraction, enough for the mic to catch her without her raising her voice. "Real is exactly why I'm here," she said. Calm, clipped. "And if age decides who gets to speak, then maybe we should cancel half of American history." A murmur rolled from the back rows. She let it breathe, then set her hands on the edge of the desk, palms down, not defensive, not aggressive, just planted. "You've played a lot of tough guys," she added, head tipping slightly, "but you don't get to play the referee." The moderator exhaled audibly. Camera 3 punched in on Robert, camera 1 drifted to a tight on Karoline. The screen split them, heat meeting ice. He tried to cut her off. She didn't raise her volume, she raised her clarity. "You called me a kid," she said, eyes glittering under the rigged light bar. "That's not an argument, that's a crutch. If the facts were on your side, you wouldn't need the insult." A few front-row viewers applauded, tentative at first, then more sure. De Niro's hand curled against the desk, knuckles pale. "Facts," he said, half laughter, half threat. "You want facts?" Karoline nodded once. "I want standards," she replied. "For me, for you, for everybody watching. I want a conversation where your resume isn't a weapon and my birth year isn't a disqualifier." She turned slightly toward the camera, not breaking eye contact with the lens. "People at home don't care how many Oscars you have. They care if their paycheck stretches to Friday. They care if their streets are safe. They care if anyone on this stage will stop performing long enough to listen." Silence pressed in, thick, expectant. Even the hum of the lights seemed to dim. The control room director whispered, "Hold on her. Don't lose that look." Robert tried for one more push. "You think you're ready for this?" he said, as if daring her to step into a ring he owned. Karoline's mouth curved, not a smile, exactly, something closer to acceptance of the fight. "I didn't come for ready," she said. "I came for real." She tapped the cross at her collar once, a private steadiness no one could interrupt, then set her gaze back on him. "If you want a scene, you picked the wrong partner. If you want answers, ask your first real question." The audience erupted, some cheers, some boos, all volume. The moderator's pen hovered uselessly above the rundown. The show had slipped its rails, and no one wanted it back on track. On the broadcast monitor, a single line of closed captioning lagged, "You're just a kid." Then Karoline's reply rolled across the bottom of the screen like a verdict, "I came for real." The studio felt like it was holding its breath. Robert De Niro leaned back in his chair, lips pressed thin, the fire in his eyes refusing to dim. He had thrown the first grenade, but Karoline had not only caught it, she had tossed it back without raising her voice. That's what unsettled him. He was used to shouting matches, to noise overpowering nuance. But this was different, her words weren't loud, but they carried weight. And everyone could feel it. "All right," Robert said finally, dragging the word out, as if buying time. Let's stop pretending you've got the answers. You're not even out of training wheels. His hands chopped the air, his voice thick with scorn. You think you can stand toe-to-toe with people who've lived this longer than you've been alive? You don't know politics, sweetheart. You don't know life. There was an audible groan from the crowd. Not because they agreed, but because the condescension stung, even on their behalf. Karoline's fingers drummed once against the desk. Calm, steady, she didn't break. Sweetheart, she repeated, letting the word hang like a shard of glass. Then she looked right into the camera. That's how women in this country get dismissed every single day. Call her a sweetheart, call her a kid, call her anything but right. But here's the truth, labels don't lower rent. Labels don't make groceries affordable. And labels sure don't secure our borders. The crowd erupted. Applause broke out, some even standing. Robert's jaw twitched, the corner of his mouth threatening to break character. But Karoline wasn't done. She leaned in just slightly, just enough to lock him in place. You want to talk about experience? Experience doesn't excuse arrogance. Experience doesn't mean you've got wisdom. It just means you've had more time to get it wrong. And maybe, just maybe, the problem is that the people who've had the longest time in power have done the least for the people outside of it. The line landed like thunder. Robert tried to laugh it off, but the sound cracked. So you think you've got all the answers, huh? Karoline shook her head, her hair catching the light. No, I don't claim to have all the answers. But I refuse to keep quiet while the so-called experts keep failing us. If that makes me just a kid, then maybe the kids are the only adults left in the room. The audience roared, cheers, whistles, stomps on the floor. Robert's face flushed, his fists tightening on the desk as though he could squeeze control back into his hands. But the energy was gone. The studio belonged to her now, and even the cameras seemed to tilt in her direction, framing her words like history. The control room director whispered into his mic, "This isn't his scene anymore. This is hers." The moderator finally tried to steer the wrecked rundown back on track. "We were scheduled to discuss the economy," he said, voice clipped, eyes darting between the two like a referee who'd lost his whistle. "Jobs, inflation, energy." Robert cut him off with a sweep of his hand. "Spare me the bullet points," he snapped, glaring at Karoline. "I'm not debating a press release. I'm debating a parrot." A few in the audience hissed, others leaned forward, hungry for the hit. Karoline didn't blink. She reached into a slim folder, no theatrics, no flourish, and slid a single page onto the desk. The paper's edge gleamed under the stage lights. "Good," she said softly. "Because I didn't bring a press release. I brought names." Robert paused. The camera tightened on her hand as she tapped the page. Melissa in Ohio who works 2 jobs and still picks which bill gets paid late. Ramon in South Texas who boards his shop at night because the quiet isn't quiet anymore. Kayla in Pennsylvania whose rent jumped more than her raise. I talk to people who don't trend on social media, but they feel every decision made by people who do. The audience murmured, recognition, not applause. The kind that settles in your chest. Karoline's voice stayed even. "You called me a kid. Fine. Then call these stories the homework you skipped before class. Because the ground truth doesn't care how many magazine covers you've had." Robert rolled his shoulders like an athlete resetting for the next round. "Cute rhetoric," he said, letting sarcasm drip. "But the world is complicated. You don't just wave a list in. Complicated is the excuse powerful people use when they don't want to answer simple questions." Karoline cut in, still calm. "Why did a paycheck that once covered a month now cover 3 weeks? Why does a young family look at a grocery receipt and choose fear over fresh? Why are small towns treated like flyover until it's time to harvest votes?" The moderator tried to regain control again. Let's return to policy specifics." Karoline nodded. "Sure. Start with energy." She turned to Robert. You lecture the country from a coastal studio while people in the interior pay more to drive to the job that pays too little. That's not a talking point, that's a map. And it's not red or blue, it's asphalt and distance. A tight smile flickered across Robert's face. Classic actors tell of buying time. You sound rehearsed, he said. I sound prepared, she replied. There's a difference. Rehearsed is what happens when you memorize applause lines. Prepared is what happens when you memorize people. The studio cracked, laughter from one side, a low, "That's right," from somewhere in the rafters. Robert sat forward, elbows on the desk, trying to reclaim gravity. Look, I've been around long enough to know this game. You ride outrage like a wave and call it courage. But when the tide goes out, experience stays. Karoline tilted her head, considering the line, then let it go like a paper boat. Experience is a lousy compass if it always points back to you, she said. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to represent people you haven't looked in the eye in a long time. For the first time, Robert glanced toward the audience, as if he might find a lifeline out there, someone to boo loudly enough to drown her out. He found phones raised instead, lenses glinting. The moderator sensed the inflection point and took a risky gamble. All right, he said, 30 seconds each. Give me one policy, one change, one thing tomorrow that would make life better for the people on that page. Robert opened his mouth, then stalled, calculating, weighing slogans against specifics. The camera cut back to Karoline. She didn't hesitate. Transparency, she said. Force every department that touches your wallet to publish their decisions in plain English, before they do it. Sunlight before signatures. If a rule will raise your bill, you deserve to see it coming and say something about it before it lands. The room went quiet again, different quiet, curious quiet. Robert finally found his voice. That's naive. Or, Karoline said, eyes bright as glass, it's adulthood. The control room director whispered, we've got a moment here. On the split screen, Robert looked smaller than a legend should, and Karoline looked larger than a rookie could. Somewhere, applause began again, uncoordinated, stubborn, real. The cameras tightened again, the split screen showing Robert's frown hardening against Karoline's steady posture. The studio audience knew what was happening. This wasn't just another exchange, it was the kind of moment where someone either folded or forged steel in front of millions. Robert leaned in, voice sharp. You think the country runs on fairy tales? Sunlight before signatures, please. That's a soundbite. Reality is messy. Governing is compromise. Karoline didn't flinch. She clasped her hands lightly on the desk, her cross necklace glinting under the lights, her tone low but edged. Compromise isn't the same as surrender. And messy isn't an excuse for secret. People don't care if you call it complicated. They care that their rent eats their raise. They care that Washington speaks in riddles while their lives are written in overdue notices. The audience hummed again, a ripple of truth spreading through the room. Robert tried to reclaim the stage with force. You're a kid playing at politics. You read some statistics, wave some anecdotes, and call it wisdom. But the weight of this country, he jabbed the desk with a finger, requires shoulders stronger than slogans. Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned forward for the first time all night. Her voice cut through like glass. If being young means I haven't learned how to lie smoothly, then I'll take it. Because the truth doesn't get old, it gets buried. And I won't let you shovel dirt on it. Phones went up again, the blue light of screens catching every word. Robert tried humor, the weapon of veterans. Oh, that'll look nice on a bumper sticker, he scoffed. Karoline countered instantly, better on a bumper sticker than hidden in a lobbyist's memo. That line landed. The audience cracked with applause, not forced, not polite, organic, raw. Even the moderator froze for a second, his notes forgotten. Robert shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his jacket. You don't understand the price of standing in this arena, he muttered. Karoline's reply was almost soft. I understand the price of staying silent. It's paid every day by people who'll never be in this arena. That's why I'm here. And why I won't blink." The director's voice in the control room buzzed with urgency. "We've got lightning. Keep the feed rolling." Robert looked out at the audience again, searching for rescue. But this time, he saw heads nodding, not with him, but with her. He realized too late the tide had turned. The moderator finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a man who knew history was unfolding on his stage. "We'll return after the break. But I think America just witnessed something very different than a debate." The red light on the camera faded, and the crowd erupted. The commercial break did nothing to cool the air. If anything, the tension thickened. The audience whispered in low murmurs, some still replaying Karoline's words into their phones for social media. Robert, arms crossed, stared at the floor as if rehearsing a comeback. The moderator shuffled his cards, but everyone in the room knew control had already slipped away. When the red light blinked back on, Robert launched before the first question was asked. "This is the problem," he thundered. "We let rookies with microphones pretend they've carried the burdens of power. I've watched administrations rise and fall. I've seen leaders age decades in a single term. And you," he pointed directly at Karoline, "have no idea what it takes." The studio fell quiet, the insult hanging heavy. Karoline took a breath, her eyes never leaving his. Her voice was measured, almost calm, but it cut deeper for that reason. "You're right about one thing, Robert. I haven't aged in office. But maybe that's the problem, our leaders wear their years like scars of battles they never fought for us. They fought for their reputations. Their contracts. Their next endorsement deal." Murmurs swelled again, stronger this time. Robert tried to interrupt, but she pushed forward, her tone rising just enough. "Experience doesn't mean wisdom if you never listened. And carrying the burden of power isn't noble if the people paying the price are the ones who never signed up for it." The moderator leaned forward, almost whispering, "Ms. Leavitt, are you saying?" "Yes," she cut in, her gaze steady. "I'm saying that pretending only age or fame earns authority is the oldest scam in American politics. And tonight, I won't let it pass without naming it." Applause broke again, sharp and sudden. Robert clenched his jaw. He muttered, almost to himself, "You don't know who you're up against." Karoline smiled faintly, leaning closer. "Neither did you." The line detonated across the room. Laughter, applause, cheers, it was the kind of organic eruption no producer could stage. Robert sat back, clearly rattled. The veteran actor, used to command, suddenly looked like he had wandered into a scene where the script was no longer his. The moderator cleared his throat, almost nervously. "Well, let's move forward." But everyone knew the forward motion belonged to one person now, and it wasn't Robert De Niro. Robert leaned forward, gripping the edges of his chair like a man who'd been cornered. His voice dropped lower, trading volume for intensity. "Do you have any idea what it means to put your reputation, your career, your life on the line for a cause? I've taken blows from the press, I've risked everything to speak truth through art. That's more than you'll ever know." The studio went still. It was the kind of moment where older generations might nod, sympathetic to a man claiming the pain of decades in the public eye. But Karoline didn't flinch. She waited a beat, her silence daring him to believe his own mythology. Then she spoke, slow but firm. "You risked nothing that wasn't cushioned by fame, Robert. The harshest review you ever got still ended with a limo waiting outside. You got paid to act like a rebel. The rest of us? We had to live it. Ordinary people don't have producers editing their mistakes out. We don't get second takes." Gasps rippled across the audience. Even the moderator froze, unsure if he should intervene. Karoline leaned in closer, her hands clasped on the table. "And don't mistake me. I respect your art. But art is safe when you know the credits roll. What I'm talking about, what this generation is living, isn't scripted. We don't get applause for surviving the fallout. We just pay the price. The crowd burst into applause, raw and unpolished. It wasn't polite, it was defiant. Robert shook his head, almost laughing in disbelief. You think you've cornered me? You're just spouting lines you know will trend. That's not truth. That's manipulation. Karoline's eyes narrowed. If it trends, it's because people recognize themselves in it. That's what scares you. You're not the mirror anymore, Robert, you're the one being reflected. And you don't like what you see. The line hit like a thunderclap. Some in the audience stood, clapping, while others sat stunned. Robert sat back, visibly rattled, his earlier authority slipping like sand through his fingers. The moderator finally cut in, voice shaking slightly. All right, let's regain some control here. But it was too late. The energy of the room had shifted entirely. Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she had redefined the battleground. This wasn't about her being young, or him being seasoned. It was about truth versus performance. And the crowd already knew which one rang louder tonight. The studio air was thick with tension. Robert De Niro had just raised his voice, spitting the words, "You're just a kid. You don't know a damn thing about the real world." His voice echoed, bouncing off the walls like a final verdict. The audience gasped, some even clapped nervously, expecting Karoline to falter. But Karoline didn't blink. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, and for a moment, silence cut through the chaos. Then, with a calm that almost felt like defiance, she fired back. If being young means telling the truth when everyone else is afraid, then I'll wear that insult as a badge. Her tone was steady but razor-sharp, each syllable cutting through the noise. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the unshakable poise of a woman decades younger than De Niro but infinitely less afraid. Online, clips of the exchange were already being clipped and shared, captions blazing across Twitter and TikTok. She didn't flinch. De Niro, visibly thrown off, tried to recover with a laugh that came out strained. But Karoline pressed on. Your generation made the mess we're living in, she said firmly. My generation doesn't get the luxury of hiding behind fame or speeches, we inherit the cost. So don't tell me I know nothing. I see everything clearer than you want me to. The crowd erupted, not with pity applause, but with raw, stunned energy. Even those who disagreed with her politics couldn't ignore the spectacle of an unyielding young voice standing her ground against one of Hollywood's loudest names. For the first time that night, it wasn't De Niro holding the stage, it was Karoline. De Niro leaned back in his chair, his face tightening, clearly not used to being spoken to this way. For decades, he had been the one intimidating others, on set, in interviews, even in politics when he felt the urge to lecture. But here, in front of a live audience, Karoline had turned the tables. The crowd, sensing the shift, murmured with a restless energy. Some booed him. Others shouted Karoline's name. The control he once held was slipping, and everyone could feel it. Karoline didn't waste the moment. She raised her voice just enough for the microphones to catch every word. Robert, you call me a kid, but maybe that's why I'm not jaded, not bitter, not too invested in keeping my place at the table. Maybe that's why I still have the guts to speak. The audience broke into applause, loud and genuine. For the first time, De Niro looked cornered. He rubbed his forehead, as though trying to gather himself, but Karoline pressed forward. She gestured at the viewers at home. People out there don't care how many Oscars you have. They care about the truth, and about leaders who aren't afraid of it. Her words sliced through the tension, and the moment felt bigger than the stage. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a clash of eras. A Hollywood titan, hardened by power and time, facing a young political voice who refused to bow. Twitter feeds were exploding, hashtags climbing, hashtag Karoline versus De Niro. Clip spread with captions like, "She shut him down without breaking a sweat." By the time Karoline finished her point, the audience was no longer looking at De Niro for the next line. All eyes were on her. And that was the real defeat. She had shifted the spotlight permanently. De Niro tried one last desperate move. He slammed his hand on the armrest, his voice cracking with frustration. "You think you've won because you've got a few claps? This isn't a movie, kid. This is real life, and you don't know how it works." His words came out sharper than intended, and the audience gasped, not because they agreed, but because it sounded like he was losing control. Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "Real life is exactly what I'm talking about, Robert. Real life is the family struggling to pay rent while Hollywood millionaires tell them what's moral. Real life is veterans who get ignored while elites preach from stages. You want to know who doesn't understand real life? It's the ones sitting in mansions telling us what to think." The crowd erupted, louder than before. Even those who came in skeptical couldn't deny the weight of her words. The camera zoomed in on De Niro. He looked smaller, almost weary, as though the fight had drained him. Meanwhile, Karoline stood tall, her tone calm but cutting. She had dismantled his entire performance with simple, relatable truth. Online, the moment was already viral. Headlines blared, "Karoline schools De Niro on Real America." Memes spread with screenshots of his stunned face beside her poised expression. The power dynamic had flipped so completely that the stage felt transformed. Karoline ended the exchange with a line that would echo across platforms: "This isn't about scripts or applause, it's about people. And I will never stop speaking for them, no matter who tries to shout me down." The crowd roared in approval. De Niro leaned back, silent at last. The night belonged to her, and everyone knew it. The lights in the studio dimmed slightly as the moderator tried to close the segment, but it was too late. Karoline had already defined the ending. She rose from her chair, her voice steady and commanding. "America doesn't need Hollywood lectures. It needs honesty. It needs courage. And it needs leaders who understand the struggles of everyday people." The audience stood, clapping and cheering, some even chanting her name. De Niro remained in his seat, looking down, avoiding the cameras. The man once celebrated for his powerful performances had been reduced to silence, his outburst drowned out by Karoline's clarity. Across social media, clips spread like wildfire. On X, one trending headline read, "De Niro shouts, Karoline leads." On TikTok, teens repeated her closing line over patriotic music. Even mainstream outlets, reluctant to admit her dominance, described the exchange as a generational clash that left De Niro visibly rattled. Karoline supporters called it a defining moment, not because she humiliated a celebrity, but because she reminded people that truth outweighs theatrics. She hadn't come to the stage to spar with a Hollywood icon, she had come to speak for millions who felt voiceless. As she left the studio, cameras followed her, but she didn't bask in the spotlight. Instead, she turned to a small group of young attendees and told them, "Never be afraid to speak up. Even if the world tells you to sit down, stand taller." The night was more than a debate, it was a cultural reset. Robert De Niro's anger had given her a stage, but Karoline's conviction had claimed it. The final headline the next morning summed it up perfectly: a star yelled. A leader spoke. And America heard the difference. Tonight was never about me versus a celebrity, or politics versus Hollywood. It was about something bigger, the power of truth over noise. Robert De Niro shouted because he thought volume could replace substance. But America doesn't need more shouting. It needs leaders willing to stand, speak, and fight for what matters. I stood here not to win an argument, but to remind everyone watching that you don't need a stage, a script, or applause to defend your values, you just need courage. Courage to say what's right, even when the powerful laugh. Courage to stand tall, even when the room tells you to sit down. And to every young person listening, let this be your takeaway: never let the world define your worth. You don't need Hollywood's approval. You don't need a headline. What you need is conviction. If you hold on to that, no amount of fame, wealth, or spotlight can outshine your voice. This wasn't my victory. It was a victory for every American who's tired of being lectured and silenced. And tonight, they were heard. Thank you.